So good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us. Today, we're going to be talking about the scientific research and experimental development tax credits, which I know many of you in our Queen Startup Runway were interested in learning about. So before we do that, I just want to take a quick moment to introduce myself to some of you on here who haven't met me. My name's Amanda Gilbert. I'm the Communications Coordinator with Queen's Partnerships and Innovation, and we host a number of workshops and accelerator programs with the support of the Government of Canada through FedDev funding. So if you want to take a moment to put in the chat who you are, where you're from, what your business is, that would be great. And then before I get into it, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that Queen's University is situated on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee people. And we're very grateful to be able to live and learn on these lands today. So if you're putting your location in the chat and you're outside of the Kingston region and you know the traditional lands that you're on, please feel free to add that in there as well. Okay, so we're going to jump right into it. I'm going to hand the reins over to Bill. Bill's joining us from Accolade Consulting, and he's pre-pandemic. Bill has put on an information session for us at Seaway Co-working. So we're excited to have him back again today, and I hope that you find the information here helpful.
All right, thanks, Amanda. I appreciate it. I'm going to go through a presentation on SR&ED, general background, some specifics. We're not going to get super detailed. Please stop at any time and ask questions about anything that jumps out at you. Ask examples specific to your business, etc. Don't hesitate to interrupt. Otherwise, I'm just going to go through the slides here, which I can make available to you upon request. Okay. So we are talking about SR&ED today. I'm not sure how familiar everyone is, so I'm just going to assume, even though you're not supposed to assume, that we're starting from kind of a zero. Okay, so SR&ED stands for Scientific Research and Experimental Development. Okay, a little background on the goals for today and how we approach teaching our customers and whoever's interested in SR&ED about the program. So we always want to train you. The more you know, the better your claims are, the more intelligent they are, and the more informative they are, the less likely you are to get a review. The goal is always to try to get as many tax credits as you deserve while also trying to avoid a review. And we do that by putting an excellent package together. And today's training will help you to be able to do that. Okay. The most important thing that you can do is set up a data capture system. Number one takeaway from the presentation today is have an effective data capture system. It's not hard to do it. That tracks the approximate time every couple of weeks, every month. At maximum, you should be tracking your activity. What was the problem you were facing technologically? What were your trials trying to accomplish that day? And what did you achieve? Whether it worked or not does not matter to the program. So you should always be just keeping track of what you did, when, who, and how many hours. We're going to get a little bit more details on that as we go along, but that is the number one most important thing that you can do, because everything else you can always find it in emails, invoices, etc. But what you can't do is scratch your head and think back 6, 12, 18 months to what was I doing that day and who was I doing it with and how much time did we spend. Okay. So if you have something that exists already and you can adapt it for SR&ED, that's also great. But in the absence of that, you can come up with something, or you can reach out to me if need be, and I'm happy to supply you with something that's very easy and effective. Okay, and on the consulting side, this speaks to what you should be doing also. On the consulting side, we try to visit everybody quarterly, Zoom or in person. Constant contact, constant updating is the key that goes along with the data capture point that I mentioned earlier. Okay, so from a reviewer's perspective, there's always 2 steps. Determine if there's SR&ED. Have you met the definition of what is required for SR&ED by the Tax Act? And that is straight from the Tax Act. It says SR&ED requires that there be a systematic investigation or a search carried on in the field of science or technology by means of experiment or analysis for the advancement of scientific knowledge or technological advancement. So you have to have a technology problem It can't be a style problem. It can't be a marketing problem. It can't be a business problem. It must be technological. You have a technological problem. You reach out into the world of due diligence. That's already there. It's not helpful. So once you've been brought up to speed in whatever you're trying to accomplish, whatever you relied on to get you up to speed, patent searches, IP searches, Google searches, talking to friends in the industry, talking to suppliers, talking to professors, talking to old work colleagues, that's supposed to not be included in SR&ED. So we lump that all under due diligence. So you're brought up to speed by what's available in the world, what's available to you. Your competitor could be next door to you and they know how to do what you're looking to do, but they're not going to tell you. That's okay. You can still claim SR&ED. But you have to demonstrate that you reached out into the world of available information available to you. You tried your first trial. It did not work. It did not remove the technology problem that you were trying to overcome. So you were forced to scratch your head and try to come up with the next iteration. SR&ED does not care whether or not you succeeded or failed. It only cares that you did a systematic investigation, you were focused on technology, and that you learned something as a result. Okay. And so if you get reviewed, and eventually everyone does get reviewed, how often is determined by how good your technical reports are written and how good your data capture is. If you get reviewed, then they determine the extent of the work. They look at your data capture, they look at the hours, and if everything has been kept up relatively accurately, and there's nothing that sticks out that you can't justify, your invoices are all there, they're all in the proper year or whatever, then they determine how many changes they may or may not make to the claim. This is all, of course, if you get reviewed. Okay, so this is just reiterating what I mentioned before. You start from the left and you go to the right. You have technological obstacles or challenges. You are forced to come up with new theories and investigations or trials, iterations to solve these challenges. And then once you solve your challenge or fail solving it, you've gained the knowledge. This is what we call a technological advancement. That is a key component of writing your SR&ED technological description. You must demonstrate what the problem was that project faced. The second question of every project is, what trials or experiments, analyses did you do in the fiscal year to try to remove those problems or challenges? And then the third question, what did you learn technologically that advanced your company's knowledge? Because this is such an important point, this is yet another way to demonstrate this flow from problem to advancement. We go again from left to right. You look at market research, that's not SR&ED, but you need to know as a business, does the market want it? Not SR&ED. Training and brainstorming. Sometimes people try to claim training. Oh, well, we had a special machine that required training, etc. Training is available to you. So because you can hire it and it's available and anyone has access to it, it is strictly forbidden from being claimed for SR&ED because anybody can do it. Brainstorming also. If you're looking at idea or iteration number 1, you're still kind of in that due diligence phase of gathering up. What do I know now? What do I have access to now? You have to come up with everything that's available to you first, and then fail, and then you're doing SR&ED because there's no other knowledge available to you. Okay, so moving to stage 2 here, if you can see me waving my mouse, we look at known or existing technologies. You apply internal and existing external available know-how, not SR&ED, because it's available to you, it's due diligence. Experimentation, stage 3. The first one, the very first trial, you set it up after doing a bunch of due diligence, and then you look at the system response to known methods or technologies. You adjust input variables and measure output responses. Again, that's your first trial after doing as much due diligence as you can possibly do. So that first trial generally would not be considered SR&ED. But then we move to these 2 yellow highlighted sections. Well, my first trial didn't work. And so now I have to come up with my next idea. So now that you're on your own and you're on iteration 2 and beyond, up until N, then you're doing SR&ED. And of course, when you create new knowledge for your company, you're also creating IP. That's not a requirement for SR&ED. You don't have to file for IP and actually receive documentation stating they've created IP, but you know that internally you're coming up with something that's internal. Okay, when you are claiming for SR&ED, you must always consider 5 questions. All 5 questions have to be answered yes in order for it to be considered SR&ED. So this is kind of a general guideline for you to consider. Okay, was there a scientific or technological uncertainty? Again, this is just saying, please don't let this be a project about marketing or other style changes or business opportunities. It can't be anything but technology. Question 2, did the project or the effort involve formulating hypotheses specifically aimed at reducing or eliminating that uncertainty? What that's saying is you can't just say, I'm trying to achieve this target value, so let me just play with these knobs and figure out, if I can get the desired result. Just fiddling with something or calling your vendor and saying, I have this problem. I'll give you an example. We had a customer who did a very, very expensive set of trials on how to better de-ice wings of an airplane. So what they did was they called their vendor and got the 3 available de-icing agents, spent a ton of money and ran these trials, and were very upset with us when we told them that that would not be SR&ED. But all they did was identify the problem, reach out to the vendor, secure 3 products that are available to anyone on the market, and they ran trials. The product number 1 didn't work, try product number 2. Product number 2 didn't work, try product number 3. There's no hypothesis there. There's no, if they tried to come up with their own de-icer, possibly that would have been SR&ED. If they tried to implement or come up with a process that involved special handling or special treatment or any sort of alteration to the off-the-shelf products, possibly that would be SR&ED. But simply taking something that is available off the shelf and manually going through it without any thinking, that's not SR&ED. So here we're just trying to say, make sure that you identify the problem, you've done your due diligence, and then you come up with a hypothesis. I think that this may work because this is the problem I'm having. This is what I've learned from the past. This is what due diligence tells me, etc. Question 3, was the overall approach adopted consistent with a systematic investigation or search, including formulating and testing the hypothesis by means of experimental analysis? That's kind of just building on question number 2, so we won't spend too much time on that. Question number 4, was the overall approach undertaken for the purpose of achieving a scientific or technological advancement? Again, we're just trying to solidify here that we're not trying to do any sort of marketing or business analysis. It has to be technological in nature. Number 5, arguably one of the most important things, again, is did you keep a record of the hypothesis tested and results? So that means make sure you have a data capture system. And that's going to be a consistent theme throughout my presentation. Okay, so here we're just kind of expanding on what we just went through. Okay, what is a SR&ED iteration? Trials iterations are conducted so that the company can understand technological issues, overcome challenges and uncertainties, and further progress the project. Obviously, you can do trials or iterations on a shop floor. You can build something, you can prototype something, but you can also do simulations. You can also do sometimes calculations. The point is, you have a technology problem, you come up with an idea, a hypothesis, you implement it in some way, whether it be physical, whether it be virtual, as long as you're recording what you did and the time spent, that's the most important thing. But obviously that's why we do the trials iterations, but just note that they can happen on a plant floor, in a boardroom, or using a computer. Programming, testing software, CAD drawings, FEA iterations, other kind of simulations, formulations, and drawings. Analysis of an iteration. Okay, so this is getting us into also the kinds of activities that we can claim for SR&ED labor. Okay, and the first category is you prepare the trial. So SR&ED program allows us to claim labor hours and time, money spent preparing a trial, preparing equipment or machinery or materials for experiment testing or analysis. So we can claim that time for SR&ED. We can claim time for actually running a trial. So in the case of a machine shop, the person running the machine, even though they might not be doing anything other than standing there, the manager, even though they might not be doing anything other than standing there, they're still watching the trial to see how the material of the machine behaves. In a more computer sort of environment, somebody sets up sort of baseline code and then runs it, tests it, does the beta analysis. Debugging for software is never allowed. User interface work is never allowed in any way, shape, or form. There are specifics about that, which are long, drawn out, and boring, but I'll just save you a lot of time and give you the shortcut. Debugging is not allowed, and neither is UI work for SR&ED. You can beta test things, But the debugging is just a kind of a manual way to go about looking at software and trying to find problems. And the government has had several court rulings, and it's strictly forbidden. So save yourself some time and don't bother going down that avenue. You will not win that argument. Okay, so we can claim shred time for preparing a trial, running a trial. Somebody's, again, in a more typical shop floor situation, somebody then looks at the data in the trial from the trial and looks at what happened, measures it, CMMs it, etc. The same could be true with software. You know, these things are slightly different depending on the industry that you're in, but anyone who looks back at the trial and says, okay, well, what happened? That's obviously critical because that informs our next iteration. So we collect the data from the trial. Someone has to go and manually collect that. Sometimes you can claim shred time for compiling the data for others to read. And then, of course, we look back and we analyze the trial results. So we set it up, we run it, we look at what happened, and we come up with the next iteration. And around and around and around we go. And that's why it's important to keep the data capture as current as possible and to update it as frequently as possible, because it's easy to forget what happened. And you will actually end up, if you were guessing, I have found through my experience 20 years in shred that you will actually guess low. So if you keep data capture, I have found more often than not, people end up capturing more hours and claiming a higher labor amount when they keep accurate track with their data capture closer to the time. Okay, so that is a little bit on what are the activities that we can claim. Along with the people who are directly engaged, which is the slide I just went through, we can also look at manager support. In the case of a shop floor situation, there may be tooling support. Someone has to develop that so that we can make our prototype parts. Sometimes there's operations support. There are often also R&D supporting, R&D teams that are doing background work. And of course, there's engineering and design support, and there's quality. So we're just trying to highlight here that it's not just the person doing the core activity. There are lots of support activities also that must be considered and also incorporated importantly into the data capture. Shred expenditure pool. What are the expenditures that we can put into our bucket? We can claim wages and salaries of technical staff or labor involved in shred activities. Those workers must be Canadian. Those workers must have a T4. They must pay taxes. Obviously, the taxes that they pay help to feed the shred program. You can spend up to 10% of your time outside of Canada, up to 10% of your total year outside of Canada. But as long as you're paid in Canada, based in Canada, working in Canada, etc., that's the most important thing. But we can take a little bit of international activity. We can claim materials that are consumed or rendered useless as a result of shred activities. Materials claimed for shred can come from anywhere in the world. They can be bought in a prior year. But to qualify for shred, they must be rendered useless and expensed off the company's books in the year that you're claiming. So this leads to a kind of a boring conversation about something called materials consumed versus materials transformed. Let's assume most often, 99% of the time, you have trials, you do some prototyping, whatever it is, you buy the materials, or it could be from a prior year, and you scrap them in the fiscal year, nice and tidy. Sometimes, however, we make usually with more complicated machinery or things like that, sometimes you'll make a prototype and you don't think it's going to work, but the year end finishes and you're not sure yet. You're pretty sure it's going to be scrapped, but it hasn't been scrapped as of the year end. What we do there is we call it materials transformed. It's going to be scrapped, but it wasn't at the end of the year. So we just put it on a different line. And then in the next year, if it ends up not being scrapped, you're supposed to refund the money back. I've only ever had that happen a handful of times in 20 years, but just so you know that try to be as timely as you can with when the materials were scrapped. And rendered useless or consumed doesn't mean it has to be in the bin, but it's going to be in the bin, and the materials are less than 10% of their original purchase value. That's the definition of what we can scrap. Okay, and you can scrap the material cost, shipping, freight, brokerage, lading, all sorts of stuff, excise duties, whatever it might be to get it there. You can include all of that in your shred claim. You cannot claim the HST that you paid if you bought the materials from Canada. If you bought them internationally, there is an HST. Okay, The next thing that we can claim for shred is subcontractor fees. Materials can come from anywhere in the world, but subcontractors can only be claimed for shred if they are Canadian. So you own a company, you need special design, special testing, special consulting, special engineering, whatever it might be. You must hire a Canadian subcontractor to do shred on your behalf, or we cannot use them in the shred claim. The government is also quite worried that the subcontractor that you hire will also claim the exact same project on their end, and they hate that double dip. So to mitigate the financial implications of any double dipping, even though I have never heard of that happening once in my 20 years, regardless, there's a rule that says whatever the subcontractor, the eligible shred fees and expenditures are, we can only use 80% of them for the actual claim. So you spend $100,000 on subcontractors that are Canadian, even though all 100,000 is totally legit shred expenditure, we can only use 80 of the 100 in the claim. Okay, they must be Canadian. And if you're in, I don't know where everyone is, I'm assuming that you're in Ontario. There I go, assuming again. If you're in Ontario, there are 3 credits available to you, and 2 of them come from the province of Ontario. If your sub is out of province, you could not claim that sub expenditure to calculate the provincial fees, but you could include the out of province subcontracting fee in the federal calculation. Something to keep in mind. Okay, also, because you are affiliated with Amanda's organization, because most of you are startups, this is something that's interesting for you. Another kind of subcontractor that you can claim for shred is called a third-party payment. So your company pays a university, a college, or any other approved institution, research institution. You pay them a flat fee. And you tell them, hey, I have a business in this domain. You get in touch with a professor or the admin, whatever, at one of these places, and you set up a contract. So you pay them 5, 10, 25,000, doesn't matter, whatever it is. They do college, university, research level, lab coat, goggles, beakers type R&D that's associated with your business. It can even inform a specific project, but you're not directing them. You get to exploit the results of the research and development before it's even published, but the institution retains the IP because that's how universities and colleges work, right? They license, or they keep the license for the IP for themselves. They want to get a couple papers published, but you pay whatever amount of money, $10,000, let's say, you can use 8,000 of it for shred, and it helps you on your project, and you can get a little bit of the sting out by claiming it for shred. And the nice thing for you is you get high level research done at a professional institution that's used, because R&D is really, really expensive. It's really expensive to innovate. That's why we have the shred program, because Canada realizes how expensive it is, even more so in Canada because of our higher taxes, etc. So for you, it's the cheapest possible way to get the biggest leap in knowledge is by paying one of these institutions to have a professor and their students do semi-specific R&D on your behalf. So I would highly recommend that you try to explore these third-party payments with colleges or universities. The other thing is, if you do a third-party payment, this is not something that's very well known. Okay, so you guys are getting some good, this is a really good nugget of knowledge here. When you're one of these people that reads shred reports all day for CRA in Charlottetown or in Sudbury at the tax centers, if you open up a claim and you see that that company is doing a third-party payment, that immediately, in my professional opinion, in my experience, it lowers the chance of you getting reviewed that year, because it just shows the government that you're doing much higher level research than many people are trying. Remember, there's a lot of people just pumping in claims left, right, center because they know there's not enough reviewers and they play a numbers game. That's not how I operate. That's not how you guys are probably going to operate, but I'm just telling you that the system gets cluttered sometimes, and it's easy to do shred the right way and have a nice clean track record, and you'll barely ever get reviewed. You just have to have good data capture, good clean reports. If they come and get and do a review, just have everything ready for them ahead of time. and you can have a really easy time. Or you can really, really push the system. You know, if you deserve 100,000, you can go for 200,000 and play the numbers. And maybe you get reviewed one year and maybe you don't. But I'll tell you this, if you have a review and you're stepping on the gas really hard and you're not prepared and you don't have good data capture, you're probably getting reviewed a few years in a row because they're going to take a much harder look at everything. Okay. So subcontractors, third-party payments must be Canadian. The institutions have to be Canadian if you're going that route, the universities or colleges. Only 80% allowed for shred. Okay. The last thing is you get to calculate overhead that supports your shred. There are two ways to do it. There's a really, really crappy, awful, horrendous way, and there's a wonderful, sweet, beautiful way. The crappy, horrible, awful way is called the traditional method. It was the original method that they implemented from 1998 when the program started. And that is, you calculate your shred-related overheads line item by line item. So if you made a 15-minute long-distance phone call to Kenya to get the world authority on whatever to talk to you about your project, and it costs $32, you literally get out your phone bill, you highlight that phone call, and then you make a note, a scribble on the side, and you say what it's about. I mean, you can see how ridiculous that would get after a while. You know, your lights, your power, your heating, your whatever it could be. So that was the way that they came up with in 1985 when the program started. In 1998, the heavens parted and angels sang, and they came up with something called the proxy method. Take 55% of your shred labor and throw it on top of the labor, no questions asked. So as long as you can prove me where the hours came from and that, you know, you spent where the $100,000 in labor came from, I'll give you 55,000 of your 100 on top of your 100. So now you see that every shred labor dollar is really worth $1.55 to the expenditure pool. And we want that expenditure pool to be as big as possible. So for that reason, for many of you, the shred labor is going to be the single most important thing to focus on. And again, this always comes back to, this is why you want to have really, really good data capture. Okay. And for the overhead, the only thing I would say is if your company is able to pay bonuses, we can use the bonuses for the raw shred hours, labor, but when you're calculating the overhead, you must remove the bonuses, and then you would take 55% of the non-bonus shred labor. Okay, that's one thing I wanted to make sure that I mentioned. Okay, so those are the 4 big expenditure categories that we can look at for shred. We used to be able to consider capital equipment that was going to be 90% or more to be shred only for the life of the asset, but hardly anything qualifies because there's not many people that can afford to buy a research and development specific machine. So in 20 years of my consulting, I only had one customer claim one machine successfully under that rule. It was not very well used. It was very confusing. It was very hard to claim, and they actually ended up getting rid of it. So today we can no longer even look at capital equipment for shred, which really, it was just a fast depreciation. So it wasn't a super huge advantage. It was just a 1-year depreciation versus whatever amortization people choose. So that used to be in the program, but no longer is. Okay, so.
Sorry, could I ask a question? Just jump in here.
Yes, Richard.
Great. Just on the last slide,
Yep.
talking about the overhead calculation.
Yeah.
The labor that you have there, that is labor spent on shred activities,
Yep.
or labor spent on the like the support activities that you were talking about, the enabling.
Well, the support activities are shred activities, right? So
Okay.
It's anybody who's preparing equipment or materials, running the trial, supervising the trial, giving technological inputs for the next trial, doing mathematical analysis, any calculation, quality checks, next iteration, idea generating, designing the next iteration. It's any of those people doing any of that. So, you know, the rule to remember is look at the activity, not the person's job title.
Sure.
Because somebody might have a high school education, but they've got 40 years of experience. They know more than people with PhDs because there's nothing better than experiential learning. So just look at the activity, okay? And if you would like, I can send you a list of the actual the defined categories of labor that qualify for shred. Maybe I can put them up here at the end of this presentation. But basically, it's just you know, preparing the trial, running the trial, gathering the information, and then redesigning.
Okay, great. Thanks.
No problem. Okay, so just to sort of reiterate everything one last time, we have idea generation, we do the prototyping, the analysis, the testing, the simulation, the FEA analysis, whatever, and then we look at what happened, and then we conclude what we might do next, and we just go round and round in a circle. So here we are. We start here, if you can see my mouse waving. Can you see my mouse waving? Yeah, you can. Thank you. So we start with our knowledge base. We do our due diligence, and we bring ourselves up to speed. Then we consider what we have learned from our due diligence with our barriers, our constraints, our technological obstacles, our technological challenges. We do all of our iterative work in the middle here, and then we try to remove our technological obstacles and come up with our objective. And then hopefully we end up with something better, faster, stronger. But it doesn't have to succeed to qualify for SR&ED. SR&ED projects can fail and still, it doesn't matter. They don't care. What they care about is that you tried, that you did your due diligence, you did the trials, you kept track of your data, you wrote a good report, and you kept track of everything. That's all they care about. I mean, nobody wants to bleed for no reason, but sometimes failure is good because it saves you from going down a rabbit hole and trying to get into a market that you can't for whatever reason. Maybe the knowledge isn't there. Like graphene a few years ago, people were so puzzled by graphene 10 years ago, and now we're making jackets and all sorts of stuff out of it because people keep pushing and pushing, and finally there's a breakthrough. Okay, so the other thing I would like to mention is that projects can go across several fiscal years, and that's fine. All you do is you stop it at the end of your fiscal year and you say, at the end of the fiscal year, here's what we learned. We're going to do this and this and that next year, and then just continue on. There's a box on the claim form that says, is this a new project or is it continuation? That's all. And you just refer back to the prior year's project title. That's all you do. And for anybody who has questions about the claim forms or anything, I'm always happy to be a resource for anybody. I know that many of the people on today's call are in startup mode, so I know that you're wearing 50 different hats. I'm happy to email you some support, some links, because you put good things out there, and good things always come back to you in some way, shape, or form. So please don't hesitate to call or email with any quick question. Jump on a Zoom, whatever. If the snow clears up, happy to meet you downtown, as long as I can make it down there. Okay, so but most importantly, keep the data capture and make a claim. If your claim is not super awesome, who cares? Put it in anyways. This is how you're going to learn. And when you're a first-time claimant, they want to review 90% of first-time claimants. So it can be a review like you're thinking about, where they might make changes if you did it wrong. But there's also something called an FTCAS, First-Time Claim Assessment Service. So we're going to make you sit through a training, which are going to tell you the same exact stuff I did, but they'll give you slightly more detail, slightly more boring, slightly less animated, but they make you sit through the training, and in exchange for that, they promise that they don't make any changes. So if you get a review, which could be the case, even if you're a first-time claimant, they might make changes. But you could also get the FTCAS, which is a no-brainer. You just make the time, you thank them very much for, you're going to learn something no matter what, no matter how boring the person is or isn't. And today, in the world of Zoom, remember, one exciting thing that's happened from a knowledge perspective is we used to rely on the local reviewers because reviewers were in 3D. But now nothing's in 3D because they will never go back to in-person again. So reviews are shorter today than they were 3 years ago because they're from 10 until 12 because they're trying to jam in 2 reviews a day. So you do a lot of work ahead of the review to get the materials and everything ready, the backup documentation. But then on review day, you've already given them the backup documentation, your more proof, your photos, your videos, all that stuff. They already have seen it, and then you just talk about it quickly. There's no plant tour, there's no in-person meeting. And so the nice thing is that now, because it's Zoom, if you are doing a very specific thing in a very specific science, they used to just try to get the most qualified person locally, but now they're getting an actual specific pinpointed expert from wherever they are in Canada. You could have a reviewer from any city in Canada that has done a PhD or whatever in exactly the science that you're doing. Whereas it used to be, well, we have a local person, they're a mechanical engineer, they'll figure it out, right? So, So that raises the stakes a little. So you got to have your stuff really good and ready, because you're talking to, it's not a joke. This person knows everything about the industry. Okay. But they also are very good at helping you and pointing you towards resources and offering you support. Many, 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 many times I've seen reviewers say, I would like to stop in sometime and give you some feedback on where I think you can take this project. Literally, they'll try to help you with your R&D. Okay. So, if a review comes, you're not afraid. As long as you've got your data capture, you're not afraid. And if you do an FTCAS, you can make any mistake you want and it won't matter, because they're not going to change the numbers. But once they've explained to you what you did wrong, it's documented and you can't make that mistake again. And normally 80% of the time, they're just like more data capture, better data capture. And if you're new to the program, it's understandable that you don't have great data capture. But once you're in a couple claims, there's no excuse. Plus, it's really easy to do it. I mean, if you're in a laboratory setting, just use your lab books. You can make a spreadsheet. Like literally, it's just a grid. Date, people involved, what you did, how many hours did you spend. Just be careful to consider all the categories of labor and don't scrimp on it. If you spent 20 hours doing something, don't feel bad for the program. Put in 20 hours, as long as you can back it up and as long as it's not unreasonable. Like if you say I spent 900 hours doing FEA analysis, okay, that's fine. They're going to want to see the different iterations of your analyses, right? So save multiple versions, make sure you're able to produce it. Don't just have one final version and expect them to believe you. Save multiple versions, keep your evidence. You don't have to keep the evidence for the submission, but you better make sure you've got pictures and videos and Gantt charts and presentations and trial results and laboratory invoices and all that stuff. You better make sure you have that ready for the review. Okay. But if you prepare well and you have good data capture, feel confident. They're not there to say no. They're there to say, show me how you did it. You know, there's an old saying that reviewers joke about. They say, show me, don't tell me. Everybody says, oh, we were conservative in our claim. They just roll their eyes. Everyone says that. Show me, don't tell me. Everyone says, oh, I must have done that 15 times. Show me, don't tell me. Show me pictures. Show me blueprints. Show me iterative drawings. Show me evidence. Okay, there's a list of about 30 different types of evidence that they expect. Calendar invites, emails, invoices, pictures, videos, like I said, Gantt charts, software iterations. There's no shortage of evidentiary examples that you can submit. So you better make sure to have at least 3 or 4 of those. It's not hard to do. Your phone records, I mean, it could be anything. Take pictures of everything with your phone and just forget about it. Dump it in some folder on some 90 terabyte drive and don't think about it ever again until review day. And make sure that you can show evidence. That's it. They're not there to say no. They're there to say, show me, don't tell me a fishing story. That's it. Okay, so that's the end of the presentation. If you have specific questions about your startup, your company, where you intend to go, your competition, whatever, I'm happy to take those questions now.
Thanks for the presentation. That was very helpful for someone who's just heard the word shred before, but has never really looked behind the curtain. So that was very helpful.
Pleasure. Thank you.
I was just curious. A lot of your examples here are kind of, you bring up lab bench and like mechanical engineering type problems, which I think it's easy to see how these match up. I'm working with a software development company.
Yep.
So there is maybe a little bit less in the way of physical, tangible stuff. So you talk about things like debugging and GUI development not being eligible. Could you just talk maybe a bit more broadly about special considerations or ways to think about this kind of software development within the shred framework?
Well, I mean, like you said, there's less tangible things, right? Because it's coding, but you can still save versions. You can still save screenshots. Is that what you're asking about? Evidence? What kind of evidence? Yeah. As long as you do that, a lot of software claims that we do, they will present us with the coding logs. And then we know, like, by to the second, well, what was Richard doing that day? Well, at 12:41, he was doing this. At 12:43, he was doing this. So, you know, whatever evidence you can do, those are two really easy examples. Your coding logs and time logs, whatever you call them, and screenshots, and save different versions of the code. And if you can, you know, remember, in today's world, you will have a specific software. So if you're doing Python, this person's going to be doing Python. If you're doing machine learning, this person's going to know about machine learning. It's not square peg round hole. This is like exact knowledge of your field. So they'll understand the problems that you were going through. So two things: keep whatever evidence you can, and make sure you do a lot of due diligence. Because before you go start spending time, software moves faster than any other industry. So what you think you've solved, you said, okay, I've done enough research. Make sure you've done enough due diligence, because you might make a claim and have a review and then get burned, because they will say to you, well, if you had looked into this a little more. And I'm not saying that that's going to happen. In fact, that's never happened, but we've heard reviewers tell us in our software claims. So just make sure that you do 20% extra, 15% extra due diligence than you normally would force yourself to make a safeguard. Other than that, screenshots, the coding logs, the time logs, you'll be fine.
Okay, makes sense.
Multiple iterations of your code, multiple iterations.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, Janice.
Hi, thank you for that very insightful talk.
No problem. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. You?
Good, thanks. A little snowy, but we'll take it.
Yeah, I'm actually in BC today, and we're also snowy.
Oh, good. It's not just us.
Yeah. So for our business, we sort of have a software and a hardware portion where our team is more focused on the software part. So for the hardware part, we were going to try out a few. So we needed to make a camera because we do video-based eye tracking.
Okay.
And so it needs specific, like we have specific specs that we need for the camera and how it can work with a patient. We're using this in a patient population.
Is that pixel tracking? Is that under the general umbrella pixel tracking?
Yeah, it could go in that. Yep. And
okay.
So from what
you should check when we're off camera, you should check out triangles.ai. That's a business run by a friend of mine. Okay. They do pixel tracking for home computer users, but they track eye movement also. You never know where that discussion goes to. I know the two owners of the company, so maybe there's something that they're doing that might help you. But continue with your question. So you have to have the hardware made specifically for prototyping.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah. So that, from what I understand, so we're just buying different camera types to put them together and see if it works. That would not count as shred, correct?
Okay, in your case, it's different, because you're not just buying some liquid and spraying it on something and watching what happens. In your case, you're buying off-the-shelf hardware, and for you, one of the technological challenges will be, does our software talk effectively to this hardware to be able to do what we want it to do? And you would go on to define those metrics very specifically. We need this much resolution. We need this much, whatever it might be. You know better than I do. But I wouldn't say no. I would just say, try always to get as much of it to try to fit the definition as you can. Like, and it's not wrong to do that. It's just, you know, if you can explain to a reviewer, well, is related to the shred, and I can't know how I'm doing without it, that's different. In the example I gave, there was no input to the de-icer. There was nothing. They didn't do anything. They just bought it, sprayed it, and watched it. In your case, you're buying it, you're marrying it to custom software, you're doing custom analyses, you're doing a lot of fine-tuning. You might not be making any adjustments to the hardware, but it's an integral part of your shred. I think that the hardware, if it's rendered useless as a result of the shred, I think it's in.
Okay. Oh, cool. Okay, thank you. That was actually more optimistic than I thought.
Well, again, like, you know, I can't say this enough. They're not there to say no. They want you to have everything that you're claiming. They just want you to do the paperwork properly.
Okay.
Right. And when you ask questions like that, you know, great, it's in. But some people, they don't ask anything, and they just jam a bunch of expenditures in that don't belong there, and then they get burned. if they get reviewed. So you asked the right question. I'm glad to give you that answer. I really do think it is because you mentioned very briefly that it's a medical application.
Yeah.
So, I mean, as long as you're doing the correct amount of due diligence and ruling out the fact that anyone else has done your trials before, I think it would be in.
Okay, thank you. And then so our alternative approach was to get a subcontractor to help us develop the hardware prototype. So we would basically just give them our code that we have now, and then they would be doing the marrying. Would we be able to claim 80% of?
Okay, in that case, this is an excellent example. If they know exactly what to do, it's not shred because they know how to do it. But if you go to them and you say, I want this to happen, and they say, ooh, I'm not sure, we'll do some trials on your behalf, then it's shred.
Yeah. Okay.
So ask them that question. I mean, if they know exactly what to do and you're just going to pay them a buttload of money to do it, it's not shred. But if they're also struggling, if they don't have the answer, they are doing shred for you, and then you can claim it.
Okay.
Make sure they're in BC if you can, because the BC tax credit is 10%. Why not, try? If you can find somebody in BC, why give up 10%?
Yeah. So actually our operations is in Ontario, so I should find someone in Ontario, right? Yeah.
If you're it's wherever the company files out of.
Yeah. Okay.
So if you're filing in Ontario, then good. Then you have 12 million people to choose from.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I sort of had a related question to that.
Sure.
I have to think. I sort of forgot what it was.
Okay. Come back whenever whenever the reminder pops back into your head.
Thank you.
And make sure you have data capture. I've said it about 30 times. I'm going to say it 31. It is the most important thing. Okay. Janice, for you, if you have a team or whatever, then I'm happy to share with Amanda the data capture that we use. Basically, it's just the dates. And then I have columns of your team. So there's about 25 columns, and you just put people's initials. And then this way you can update your entire team in about 40 seconds for 2 weeks of work. It's super easy. So I'll send that to Amanda and she can share with the group. And our number's on there. If you have any questions, you can call me or email me. How do I fill this out? Is this shred? Is this due diligence? Should I be claiming this? Call anytime.
That would be great. Thank you. Yeah. Any samples that you have? That would be.
Yeah. I'll give Amanda a couple of attachments and she can distribute them to everybody.
Thank you. Yeah, so I sort of remember my question. So part of what we need to test is because we need this thing to be put in front of a patient and be able to capture their data effectively and not lose too much data. So that part of it is how do we, it's almost like a user interface. How do we form this so that it will sit on a desk and they wouldn't move too much and lose data and that they would be able to handle it themselves without some expert having to be beside them so they can learn how to do it themselves. So is that too much of a user interface question?
No, that's not a user interface at all. That is the literal example of interfacing with a user. But what I'm talking about is you go to the machine's dashboard and there's a screen there and it says push for start. That's the user interface that you can't claim.
Okay.
Never. But what you're saying is that's a shred project. How do I construct it so that I can use a phone or so that I can send a unit to the home and then they can do it without screwing it up?
Yeah.
Because then we're talking about angles and quality of photography and the translation to the software. And there's all sorts of, it's not just an ergonomic thing. You're talking about a real issue for shred. That's not a user interface. You should be able to claim at least a part of what you're describing.
Okay, perfect. Thank
you. Problem. No problem. I'm just giving away the government's money today. No problem. Anybody else with questions about shred? Anybody having trouble sleeping and want to talk about tax law? No. Everyone's having a great time sleeping. Okay, good. Okay. Well, look, if there's no other questions, Amanda, I don't know if you want to jump in, but if there's no other questions, I would again invite everyone to just call or email anytime. I don't care if you're a one-person company. I don't care how small you are. I don't care. If I can answer a question and save you some time, I'm not going to do homework for you. I'm not going to do legwork. But if you want to ask me something that I know already, I'm happy to email you a resource that I might have about Shred specifically. I don't deal with anything except Shred. Which brings up, if you have the opportunity to claim IRAP, Industrial Research Assistance Program, you should do that, because IRAP gives you the money for your Shred up front. And as a business, that's good for you. Okay. You can also claim Shred on the portion that IRAP doesn't cover, because IRAP will most often cover 50% of labor or 80% of labor or 50% of materials, but they don't give you everything, right? So you're still paying something. So what we do is we do the Shred claim after, and we put your full Shred expenditures in, and then we back out the assistance. But the cool thing there is, if you have 100,000 in labor, you have 55,000 in overhead, so you've got 155,000 in Shred labor, right? Let's say that they covered 50% of labor. We're only reducing your 155 by 50. So you get to calculate and keep the overhead based on 100%. You see what I'm saying? So it's smart for you to still claim IRAP, and you get the money up front. And if you claim IRAP, it also looks good on your application, and therefore you're less likely to be reviewed, because IRAP has many of the same, almost exact same rules as Shred. It's got to be technology based. It can't be just, they do have a program just for marketing and for business study, but if you do the technology side of things, then that's basically the same rules as Shred. So basically it's like the twin of Shred, but it's the first baby born, and then Shred is the second baby born. Okay. So you should definitely look to do the IRAP claim. They are a little bit trickier to do, but IRAP has program officers that help you with your application. Okay, but there is more writing. But again, for a startup who's looking for cash no matter what, I would definitely suggest that you do that. Okay, so other than that, make sure you're looking for IRAP. If you're having questions about the claim forms or how it works with the taxes, etc., again, I'm happy to email you. I'm not going to do your report for you. I'm not going to read your report and tell you what I think, but I will discuss with you, what can I, like Janice's example, what can I look for Shred? And then I can lower the microscope later. I'm happy to just gently herd you in a general direction. But don't ask me to read your reports, because I get that all the time. And I got too many customers of my own. I got to read their reports too. And just so you guys know, I've been speaking to you today with 20 years of experience in the Shred program. My business partner is my brother-in-law, and he's been doing Shred since 1994. So he writes the reports. I have a master's degree in business, and I do the numbers. So basically he does the reports, I do the numbers and the tax forms. But after 20 years, you can kind of do it all, because there's so much intersection. You are probably going to do both on your own. So if you need help, I'm telling you for the 15th time, ask me a couple simple questions. I'm happy to give you some simple answers.
Can I ask one more question? Sorry.
Yes, you can.
Sorry. So I might have missed this at the beginning, but no. So for example, if I'm doing my work using money that I got from a CIHR project grant or something, because now there's a commercial
that has to back out at the end.
Okay.
You can only claim Shred expenditures that you paid for.
Okay.
And that's why the IRAP has to come out. Any grant, any government or non-government funding. Janice, that's a great example. We had a customer of ours, a very well-known Canadian barbecue manufacturer, and they were paid by Enbridge, the gas supplier, to do a project. So we ended up not claiming the project for Shred because they received more than they spent in Shred. Okay, so in that's a very rare example. Usually you're getting less than what you actually spent because of that overhead calculation that we talked about. But definitely any grants, anything that you get, and don't misinterpret. Get the grants, get the funding, get it all up front. Don't worry. If you are paid up and you don't have any Shred left because you got paid, amazing. Don't even worry about it, because getting it all up front is better for cash flow. It's better for business, and it allows you to sleep even better at night than if I read you tax law. Okay, so definitely try to take that money whenever you can get it. Okay, the only thing you have to be careful of is just making sure that you're considering all, if a customer paid you money, if you scrap material, make sure you didn't get paid for it, that kind of thing. You can only claim what you spent out of your pocket.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, I see a couple heads nodding. No, so that's good. Amanda, final words?
Yeah, thank you so much for coming in and chatting. I think this was really good, and
My pleasure.
I think there was some really great questions here, so we really appreciate you taking the time to come in and chat with us. And we may have you back again another year to
No problem.
come in when we have new businesses
Sure.
as they come through. But this was great. Thank you so much.